Hi, I'm Diane Burstein. I'm a qualified London Blue Badge tour guide, and tours are not just for tourists, they're for people who live here too. I run a series of Discovering London courses where we go out onto the streets of London and uncover the history. And on today's walking tour, we're going to be discovering Covent Garden. I'm standing here in front of the City Lit, a place of education. You can learn a variety of subjects here. They've been in the Covent Garden area since the 1930s, and their original building here around the corner in Stukely Street was in the heart of the Rookeries. The Rookeries were areas of grim little courtyards and alleyways where there was a criminal element. And in fact, before the City Lit came here, the building that they were originally in was on the site of a school for delinquent boys. But today, don't worry, you won't find any delinquents hanging around here. It's people who want to learn about a variety of subjects. So we're standing in front of the Floral Hall, which is part of the Royal Opera House, the building you can see on the right-hand side. Both these buildings were built in 1858, and the Floral Hall was the foreign flower market, because nearby we have the old Covent Garden fruit, vegetable and flower market, which closed down in 1974. The foreign flower market operated during the day, and then in the evening this building would be transformed into a place where you could come and dance. There were balls, there were musical entertainments. Later on, it was used as a scenery store for the Royal Opera House next door. And now, if you go and see an opera or ballet at the Opera House, this building will be transformed, so the upper area will be a circulating area and bar where you can have a drink during the interval. Now, the Opera House next door is the third theatre on the site. The first one was built in 1732, and in those days it wasn't an opera house. There were operas performed there, but they had all different types of entertainment. And then, unfortunately, the theatre burnt down in 1808. They were always having fires in theatres. On this occasion, somebody fired a gun as part of a play, and unfortunately a spark from that gun led to the theatre burning down. Well, the manager at the time, John Philip Kemble, he wanted to rebuild the theatre bigger and better than it had been before. So what did he do? When he opened his brand new theatre in 1809, he put the theatre prices up. Well, it seemed to be going well because people had bought their tickets. It was a full house. But when John Philip Kemble stepped out onto the stage, he was in the middle of a Shakespearean soliloquy when a member of the audience jumped up and started shouting, old prices, we want the old prices." And then another member of the audience jumped up, and he'd brought a drum with him and so started banging the drum and shouting the same thing. Soon you had a situation where 50% of the audience had bought musical instruments with them and were shouting, "We want the old prices." The other 50% were shouting, "Sit down, be quiet, we want to hear the play." And eventually the police were called. Well, they didn't have a proper police force in those days, but they called the local militia, and the riot act was read, and the rioters had to disperse. But they came back the next night and the next night, and this went on for 61 nights. And in the end, John Philip Kemble put the prices down. Well, we're going to move on in time, and we're going to move on to the 1840s when this became an opera house full time. But Then we had another fire in 1856. So this is the third theatre on the site that you're looking at today. And the opera company were joined by the Royal Ballet after the Second World War. And they came after a period when this wasn't used as a theatre at all, but it was used as a dance hall, so you could come dancing. My mother remembered coming dancing here and having to stay the night because there was an air raid going on outside. So today we have this wonderful building which you can either visit to see an opera or a ballet, or you could visit the public areas inside. And sometimes they have displays of opera and ballet costumes that you can look at too. So most people think of Covent Garden as an area where you'll go out to eat, drink and go to the theatre. But it is also a residential area, which a lot of people don't realise. And behind me, you can see that we have these blocks of flats, which were tenement buildings built in the late 19th century for what the Victorians used to call the deserving poor. The deserving poor were the hard-working people who had regular employment but needed decent housing. If you have a look on this wall, you can see there's a rather interesting old sign which is telling you not to make a noise by shouting or ringing a bell. So I might get a bucket of water over my head at any moment. But they weren't really aiming at tour guides when they put that up. That sign was aimed at the many street sellers of London. If you've seen the musical Oliver and you know that song, Who Will Buy, when it's a lovely morning, Oliver Twist looks out of his window and hears people singing, I won't sing because I've got a bad voice, Who Will Buy My Sweet Red Roses? Well, in reality, what you had was a man outside your window when you were trying to sleep, ringing a bell and shouting, knives to grind, and you were trying to get sleep because maybe you'd worked all night on the printing presses down the road in Fleet Street, or maybe you'd worked in the nearby fruit and vegetable market laying out your wares. Most of the selling there was done early in the morning, so you wanted to get a little bit of rest. So that's why they put those signs up. Another thing that I like to show people here are the gas lamps. You could see one straight ahead of you. And those gas lamps date back to the time when London was illuminated not by electricity as it is today, but by gas lamps. Most of the gas lights have gone away, but there are a few remaining in places like Covent Garden, and recently a campaign group called the London Gasketeers was formed to try and protect our old gas lamps. So we're standing here in the Covent Garden Piazza, which was London's first square, except it was called a piazza because Inigo Jones, the architect who designed it, was keen on Italian architecture. When this square was first laid out in the mid-17th century, this building was not there. So in the centre of the piazza, you had a market, but it didn't have a specific building. The stall holders selling their wares, mostly fruit and vegetables, would lay out their stalls every day and pack up at night. But in 1830, it was decided to smarten up the place, so this building was erected. And if you could see the writing here, it mentions that it was erected by the Duke of Bedford. And the Dukes of Bedford were the landowners in this area and owned the land here from the 16th century right up until the early years of the 20th century. So if you would have come here up until 1974, what you would have seen were fruit and vegetables being sold and also flowers. The most famous flower seller was a fictional flower seller created by the playwright George Bernard Shaw. Her name was Eliza Doolittle, and if you have seen the play he wrote, which was called Pygmalion, or the more famous musical adaptation, My Fair Lady, at the beginning of that play and musical Eliza Doolittle is selling her flowers to people coming from the nearby Royal Opera House. And those flower sellers and the fruit and vegetable sellers disappeared in 1974. The streets around here are very, very narrow and they become very congested. So they moved the markets south of the river to an area called Nine Elms between Vauxhall and Battersea. These buildings would have been demolished if it wasn't for local people who campaigned for them to stay, and luckily their campaign was successful. So within 6 years, in 1980, the buildings here reopened, this time as places to eat, drink and be merry, just as they did in days gone by. This is the only remaining building in Covent Garden that was designed by the architect who laid out the Piazza here, Inigo Jones. It was built in the 1630s, although much refurbished since, and the portico here, well, I'm lucky to be able to stand here and talk in a quiet moment, because usually what you would see here was street entertainers. You could see jugglers here, you could see fire eaters here, you could see sword swallowers here. And that is a long tradition, because if we go back to the 1660s, a famous diarist called Samuel Pepys wrote in his diary about coming here to see Mr. Punch's puppet show. And every year in the spring, they have a Punch and Judy festival where people could come and watch the Punch and Judy puppet shows, which take place in the gardens of the church here. There is a bar in the buildings to my left here, and that is called the Punch and Judy, after those famous puppet shows. Now, the church is still used for worship, and you might wonder how you get in, because this door is blocked up. Well, Inigo Jones intended this to be the front entrance, but because you usually have the altar at the east end of the church and the entrance at the west end, they had to put the entrance in the graveyard on the other side here. So people still can enter this church, and if you go inside, the walls are lined with memorials to famous stage performers. Some of the well-known names include Charlie Chaplin, the silent movie star, Robert Helpman, the ballet dancer who played the part of the evil child catcher in the film version of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and Vivian Leigh, the star of Gone with the Wind. And more recent people to get memorials here include the actress Dame Diana Rigg, and I love her memorial because it says Diana Rigg called to rehearsal. And there is also a memorial to the actress Barbara Windsor, who is known for her role in a TV soap opera called EastEnders, where she played a pub landlady, and her character always used to be shouting, "Get out of my pub!
Get out of my pub! With pleasure!"
So that is what they have on her memorial. As they have all these memorials to actors, the church, although it's officially St Paul's, is also known as the Actors' Church. We're walking down King Street in Covent Garden. Well, Covent Garden was first developed during the reign of King Charles I, and it was one of the first places that people moved to when they came out of the crowded city. You've got some interesting shops here, Mariage Frères, a French company selling tea, but that building is worth going into, because if you go inside, you see it's a galleried building. It was originally used as an auction house where they used to auction books and antiques. In later years, it became an African cultural centre, which it was for many years. And when that relocated, it became the tea shop that it is today. So a lot of the buildings in this area have had many different uses over the years. Where we're standing in is called Neal's Yard. It's named after a man called Thomas Neal, who was master of the mint where they made the money, and that was back in 17th century. So he was a wealthy property developer. By the time we came to the 19th century, this little courtyard became a place for businesses that were associated with the nearby fruit, vegetable and flower market. So, for example, you would find companies that made wheels for the carts that the costermongers who sold their wares at the market would pull along. And if you look up at the buildings, you could see that they are warehouse-style buildings with loading doors in the upper levels. Some of them were used as fruit and vegetable warehouses, and the nearby Donmar Warehouse Theatre was originally a banana ripening warehouse. Now, after the market had left, this area was redeveloped by a man who was into the alternative business methods. His name was Nicholas Saunders, and you see a commemorative plaque to him on the wall just here. And Nicholas Saunders wanted independent businesses here. So you had dairies here, the Neal's Yard Dairy. You had independent cafes here, and some of those businesses are still here today. And then in the upper rooms, they were let out for all sorts of things like therapy workshops, rehearsal rooms. And if you look up on the building here, you could see a blue plaque that tells you that Monty Python lived here. There wasn't a real person called Monty Python. This refers to the popular comedy series in the 1970s, Monty Python's Flying Circus. And two of the writers who wrote for that series, Michael Palin and Terry Jones, they hired rooms up here where they wrote their scripts and developed their ideas, hence that commemorative plaque. There's also a little something that I want to show you just around the corner from here. So let's go this way. And what you have to remember is that at one time, this area was not a particularly savoury area. One thing that I haven't touched upon yet is the fact that it was a place for the ladies of the night, the prostitutes who would come here and they would be lurking in the corners. You would also find footpads and pickpockets, but luckily they're not around today. So let's go and see what we can find on one of the walls here. And this is a bit of London street art. It depicts the late Princess Diana in the guise of Mary Poppins. And here are the two grandchildren that she never met. We have Prince George and young Princess Charlotte. And I don't know if you could read this, but this is a bit of advice that Princess Diana always gave to her son, Prince Harry. You could be as naughty as you want, just don't get caught. The person who created this, not the famous street artist Banksy, but Bambi, who is a female street artist like Banksy. She keeps her identity a secret, but rumour has it that if we knew who Bambi was, we would all recognise her name, that she is supposed to be somebody well known from the pop world. So, who comes here and sprays by cover of darkness? Adele, maybe? Victoria Beckham? Well, you'll have to draw your own conclusions. I can't really see them with their spray can here, but it's something hidden away at the entrance to Neal's Yard, and it's these hidden sites that you will discover on a walking tour with the City Lit.